The Poverty of Vision is the 10th video in the series, Why South Africa is Getting Poorer. There's a peculiar poverty that isn't counted in budgets or loans. It's the poverty of vision, foresight, a deficit of imagination in those who lead. When leaders close their eyes to the future, they don't merely lose a vote, they bankrupt possibility. They turn tides of prosperity into trickles of regret. I want to tell you how short-sighted choices by our politicians and custodians of public trust have exacted a painful, measurable, and moral toll on South Africa's finances and future. Imagine a nation sitting on a wealth of minerals, a coastline that kisses the world, a people gifted with grit and ingenuity. Now imagine that nation forced repeatedly to repair what should have been built better while watching schools crumble, power fail, and jobs evaporate. That's our country's ledger, a record of opportunities squandered because planning was weak, priorities were misaligned, and accountability was optional. Take our electricity crisis. Power cuts are not merely an inconvenience, they are an invisible tax on every factory, every shop, every home. In 2023, South Africa's blackout epidemic was estimated to have wiped out hundreds of billions in output. The cost of disrupted energy supply is not a statistic alone, it is childbed clinics that cannot use incubators, factories that lose orders, jobs that are never created. This happened because infrastructure was not defended with the same urgency with which politicians defend status. Maintenance was deferred, investment plans stalled, governance at state power utilities grew fragile, encumbered by poor planning and political interference. The result was not simply blackouts, it was a national slowdown. Then there is the much darker ledger, the cost of corruption and what was once called state capture. This isn't theory, it's arithmetic and tragedy in equal measure. Experts and officials have tried to measure the loot and the damage. Former ministers and analysts have placed conservative figures in the hundreds of billions lost to corrupt networks that siphoned resources away from schools, clinics, and roads into private pockets. This is money that might have paid teachers, built clinics, or funded small businesses. It's money that was taken, not created. Put bluntly, corruption is a compound interest on national misfortune. It multiplies distrust, throttles growth, and corrodes the very institutions designed to protect citizens. When contracts are awarded to cronies instead of competent firms, projects fail or are never finished. Ports become congested, rails stop moving, and ordinary citizens pay more for less. Let's speak of the cost borne by our state power utility, a mirror of mismanagement and rescue packages. The state repeatedly stepped in to bail out an insolvent electricity provider, issuing loans or guarantees that are ultimately shouldered by the taxpayer. Those bailouts are emergency injections that could have been strategic investments in new capacity or in maintenance, had foresight guided policy. Instead, we watched debt pile up, credit constrained and public funds, diverted from social priorities into stopgap solutions. The arithmetic here is chilling. Every rand spent rescuing failing state projects is a rand not spent on schools, clinics, roads, or entrepreneurial support. Every year of delay compounds the bill, and while the headlines speak of billions, the lived reality is children missing schooling because transport failed, and small companies going bust because production lines couldn't run. This leads us to the human price, South Africa's unemployment. High joblessness isn't merely a statistic. It translates into households unable to afford basics, communities deprived of dignity, and a generation robbed of opportunity. When governance fails, jobs are the first casualty. When growth is stunted by avoidable crises, hiring stalls. When investment flees, the economy stops absorbing young people ready to work. A stagnant or slowing economy cannot create the jobs a nation needs, and the official unemployment rate reflects that failure. And what of investor confidence? Capital is mobile. It doesn't linger where policy is unpredictable, where assets are insecure, or where graft goes unpunished. Each rating downgrade, each scandal, each botched project sends a message. Risk is high. The consequence is less foreign direct investment, more expensive borrowing and a weaker currency, issues that increase cost of imports, raise inflation, and squeeze the poor hardest. Short sight in policy becomes a premium on borrowing. It becomes inflation on our grocery bills and interest on our mortgages. We should also not leave out the cumulative damage to human capital. Education systems, underfunded or mismanaged, produce graduates who are underprepared for the modern economy. Health systems strained by poor resource allocation see increased illness and decreased productivity. Skilled people choosing to leave because they see more predictable futures elsewhere is a direct tax on our national imagination. You cannot build high-value industries when your best minds quietly emigrate. This is strategic loss masquerading as private choice. So what does a nation lose when it lacks foresight? Growth, certainly. But more perniciously, dignity and social cohesion. When leaders spend as if there will be no tomorrow, projects start with fanfare and end in rubble. Policy cycles chase headlines while long-term visions gather dust. The result is a cycle of reaction, not strategy, of firefighting, not construction. The remedy isn't magic, it's discipline. Good governance requires structures that outlast personalities. It needs procurement systems that are transparent by design, not by accident. It needs independent institutions with teeth to investigate and prosecute malfeasance. It needs energy policy that incentivizes steady investment in generation and transmission, not political theatre. It needs education funding that is consistent and targeted to boost skills where demand is growing. It needs transport and port infrastructure that moves goods efficiently. All of these are not idealistic daydreams. They are practical investments that produce measurable returns, more jobs, higher tax revenue, broader opportunity. And here's the ethical core. Foresight isn't merely technocratic, it's moral. To plan responsibly for 10, 20, 30 years is to honor the unborn. To build a stable grid, a corruption-resistant procurement system, is to grant future citizens dignity and possibility. Leaders who ignore that duty betray a compact between generations. I don't call for puritanism. I call for accountability and for policies rooted in evidence, not in patronage. I ask for audits to be public and for procurement to be clear. I ask for the appointment of competent people, even when they do not promise short-term political gain. I ask for a citizenry that refuses to reward mediocrity and punishes capture. If you are a voter, demand long-term plans and ask how they will be funded fairly. If you run a business, insist on ethical deals, and if you serve in government, remember that your choices echo for decades, not just for your term. We are not without hope. Some initiatives do work. Reform programs that stabilize energy production, targeted infrastructure loans for rail and ports, anti-corruption frameworks tested by international bodies. Where policymakers commit to reform, investment has followed. Where governance improves, jobs have responded. These are blueprints, not miracles, proof that prudence and persistence pay dividends. The final truth is this: the act of foresight, the deliberate, often boring work of building systems that endure, is the cheapest insurance against catastrophe. It's cheaper than bailouts, emergency borrowing, than the social cost of unemployment and human despair. So let us choose prudence over spectacle. Let us prefer the steady, durable project to the flashy headline. Let us build as if our children will live here. Let us govern as if we were borrowing the earth for those who follow. For those who say the cost of change is too high, I say, calculate the cost of continuing as we are. Add up the blackouts, the bailouts, the lost jobs, the emigration of talent, the stalled factories, and you'll find that the price of inaction is debt we cannot repay with rhetoric. This is a call to all South Africans. Let's make foresight fashionable again. Let's demand it in budgets, in appointments, in schools, in the halls of power. Let's remember that stewardship is the truest form of patriotism. If we do this, South Africa will not be a story of missed chances. It will be a story of steady, cumulative triumph, of electricity that keeps factories humming, of railways that move grain and steel without ransom, of schools that elevate aspiration into skill, of a nation that invests in tomorrow as if it matters. Because, my friends, it does. South Africa, we're architects of the future. Let us build with care. Let us price our decisions for the next generation. Let the legacy we leave be of a nation whose greatest wealth was the wisdom to plan. Please like, share, leave your thoughts in the comments section and follow, subscribe, because together we can build a better South Africa.